And, it's hard because I go there and I pour out my heart to these kids and I tell them, hey, you're loved, you're special, you're intelligent. There's so much opportunity out there. You can go to college. A lot of these kids, they don't feel like they can go to college or they could ever get into college because they don't hear that message.
Hey, Nick Nanton here, and thanks for tuning in to Now to Next. I want to make sure you don't miss a single episode of this show on YouTube. So before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, just go into your settings and switch on notifications. Thanks for watching. Hey everyone, Nick Nanton here. Very excited to have this next guest on Now to Next with Nick Nanton. Been doing a lot of work with him, but we've actually never met in real person, never been able to pound it out, rub elbows, any of that stuff. So I'm looking forward to that post-pandemic. But let me give you a little bit of a bio of this incredible guy. Remi Adeleke was born in Western Africa, but following his father's untimely death, he and his mother and brother relocated permanently to the Bronx in New York City. After spending his youth on the streets of New York, Remi joined the Navy in 2002. He would later become a Navy SEAL, earning SEAL of the Year award from the Naval Special Warfare Foundation. I don't know what it would take to win the SEAL of the Year, but we're going to talk about that. After ending a successful naval career in 2016, he has since become a best-selling author, sought-after public speaker, and a successful actor and military consultant for film and television. He is the current CEO of Remi Consulting and Eighth Wonder Entertainment. Remi holds a bachelor's degree in organizational leadership and a master's in strategic leadership, both from the University of Charleston. He lives in Southern California with his wife, Jessica, and their three sons, Caden, Caleb, and Carter. His best-selling memoir, which we'll be talking about today, Transformed, a Navy SEAL's unlikely journey from the throne of Africa to the streets of the Bronx to Defying All Odds, was released in May of 2019, and it is a book you must check out. We're going to talk about the behind-the-scenes stories from the book, as well as I think a lot of you will be really interested in. Remi has an amazing story, but there are a lot of amazing stories out there in the world, but most people don't know how to tell them, how to get them in a book, how to get the world to read them. There's like lots of secrets between this. So between some of the memoir stuff, I'm going to go into that with Remi, and we'll learn some insights there too. But Remi, most importantly, thank you so much for joining me, man. It's great to see you.
No, thanks for having me. Appreciate it, Nick. It's always good hanging with you, brother.
Man, I appreciate it. And so, hey, look, so you were born in Western Africa. Your father was a big deal there. Tell us a little bit about what you remember from those times and a bit about him.
Yeah, I remember just growing up in wealth and, not wanting for anything. We had everything that we wanted. We traveled the world. We had cars, nannies, drivers. My dad was very influential. Every time people came to the house, it was almost like they were coming to the house of a king, not just because of his status, but because of his intelligence. He ran multiple businesses. He was super diverse. He was also into politics. He was actually one of the first black men on the board of the World Trade Center in the United States and the first black man on the British Financial Planning Council in Great Britain. So, a lot of people, when they came to our house and we had gatherings and get-togethers, or maybe when we were out in public, one thing I always remember is how they would kind of look upon him with awe and give him the utmost respect.
Yeah, in the book, you talk about some different circumstances where your mom from New York, much harder disciplinarian, and you try to sneak out of your bedroom down the hallway to get through the party to get to Dad because he'd let you have a few minutes. Yeah. What were those minutes like? Like, Dad is obviously an important dude, but he clearly cared a lot about you. Recount a little bit of that for me. What was going on in your brain?
Yeah. Well, I wanted to hang out with my dad. I think I'm like my kids now. My kids, like, every time I'm doing, even now, like, when they say, "What are you doing, Dad? Can we come to your office?" I'm like, "No, I don't got to work right now." But just like my kids, I just wanted to be around my dad. I just wanted to be in his presence, and also, kind of like, as kids, you look at your father like he's Superman, right? So just to be able to stand next to him and say and look up as people are kind of talking to him and say, "That's my dad, that's my dad." Like, I desire that, and so that's the biggest thing I remember about that moment is just being able to, stand next to him and say, "That's my dad," and him say, "This is my son," and kind of affirm me.
That's great. It's the conversations I have with many people. There's this, like I know my parents, I held them in high regard, and as I should. I know my kids thankfully do pretty well, but I have another friend whose goal is for his kids to see him as Superman, and I think I think that's interesting because it's a dangerous goal. I feel like because I feel like I want my kids to know that like I'm trying my best, but I'm gonna mess up.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm a flawed human being. Absolutely. So I think it's interesting. Like we all see our dads that way. As a guy who is sort of like Superman, I mean, your Michael Bay movies, you're a Navy SEAL. Like, tell me a bit about your parenting philosophy.
Yeah, well, my parenting philosophy is lead by example. That's my biggest philosophy is, I tell my kids all the time, I will never make you do something that I have not done or that I'm not willing to do. And I'll never hold you to a standard that is not, that I haven't upheld myself. And so, that's the biggest part of my parenting is, if I want my kids to be respectful to women, it's my job to be respectful to their mom. If I, if I want my kids to be honest and keep their word, then I have to do it for them. As a matter of fact, I get in trouble with my wife often because my kids would, they would be watching TV and then a trailer for a movie would come on, and like Spider-Man, nothing crazy, Spider-Man on one of the comic book movies, and they would say, Dad, can we see that Spider-Man movie, or can we see that, Avengers movie or whatever? And as a dad, I'm like, yeah, dude, like, come on, yeah, for sure, we'll go see it on the weekend. And as soon as my wife comes home from work, they'll run up to her and they say, Dad's taking us to go see Avengers or Spider-Man or whatever. And my wife is just like, she's not a big fan of like comic book movies because of the violence. Like, and to me, it's not, I don't know, I'm a different person. So to me, that's not like, it's fantasy, it's fictionalized, but she doesn't like it. And so she'll go look up the trailer and then she'll say, no, you guys can't see it. You guys can't see it. She'll tell them they can't see it. But I have to keep my word because I told them I would let them go see it. So I kind of gotten in trouble in the past for, taking my kids to go see an Avengers movie or a Spider-Man movie, and my wife finds out later. But the lesson I try to teach them in that is, hey, dude, you got to keep your word. The only thing you have in life is your word. Once you lose your word, it's hard to get it back. So.
And that's coming from a guy who's had trouble in his past and knows that. We'll go into that in a second. I think another thing that I found super interesting in the parenting side while we're on the thread is that my story doesn't need to be my kid's story. Like I didn't get, I don't know. There's certain things I had to work super hard as a teenager. I had to work really hard because my parents had plenty of love, but not enough money. Yeah. But like just because I had to work a job, let's say, to, I don't know, after school and all sorts of stuff. Like that doesn't mean they have to. Like, that's an interesting one because some of the hardest lessons I learned were lessons I hope my kids can learn the lessons without the hardship, but they need some of that. Yeah. It's a really interesting balance between like it's a continuum. I see so many people thinking that their story, like, well, that's the way I did it, that's the way my kids are going to do it. Yeah. And I think that's a super big challenge too. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. One thing that I do is, because there's absolutely no way I can recreate the environment that I grew up in. I mean, like the kids I grew up in the Bronx in a small apartment. The kids live in the suburbs in $1 million house. Like, I grew up with one parent. My kids had two. So there's absolutely no way. Like, I grew up with crackheads down the street. I mean, the biggest threat you have in the neighborhood I grew up now is these teenagers who get their Mercedes-Benz at 16 and they're speeding down the street, right? So there's absolutely no way I could recreate the life that I lived as a young kid in their lives. But one thing that I do try to do is we have a board. Me and my wife, we have this board that we have on our fridge, and it's an incentive board. And essentially, like, you kill, you eat. You know what I mean? Like, there's certain things that they have to do throughout the week, and there's a whole list, and they get a certain amount of points. They get a point per item that they check off Monday through Friday. Like, make their bed will be one thing, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Like, the next thing will be like, don't talk back to the nanny. The next thing will be like, do your homework, like, completely with no effort. Like, and next thing will be like, clean up the table after we finish having dinner. You guys wipe off the table and put your stuff in the sink. And in order for them to be able to watch a movie, or in order for them to, be able to get a treat or whatever, anything, they have to achieve, a certain amount of points. And we started out where they just had to get 30 points. But since they've gotten better, like we've increased it to 70 points, right? So that's the best I can do to try and kind of, maybe recreate, a little bit, simulate a little bit what I went through as a kid to show them, hey, nothing in life is free. Like you have to work for stuff. Like, and I tell them another thing I did with my kids one day is I took them because they would always come in my office and they would always say, Dad, why are you always working? And I have reasonable hours. Like I'm in my office from 8:30 to 4:30, and I'm with them in the morning, and then I'm with them after 4:30, especially on days like today because my wife works. And but my kids will come into my office and they say, Dad, like, why are you in your office for 8 hours? Like, what are you doing? Like, there's nothing you could be doing for 8 hours. Like, dude, I'm working. Like, Daddy has to work. And that was a concept that they didn't grasp, being, 5 and 4 at the time. And so one day I took them down to Skid Row and I said, look, guys, everything costs something in life. Like it costs money for you guys to live in this house, in the house that we live in. It costs money to get in the car that we got in to drive down here. Everything costs money. And if Daddy doesn't work, this can be our fate. Like we could be on the streets. We could have nothing. And so, they saw people peeing on the street. They saw all kinds of crazy stuff. And they were just like, wow, people actually live like this. People live like this. Why don't they have a home? I was like, I can't answer those questions, but I can tell you the reason why we're not in this situation is because your mommy and your daddy works. So there's things like that I try to do.
I love that. And I love the fact that because we do have to instill the values we learn. They just don't have to learn them the same way. And I think that's a really important lesson. Like your story doesn't need to be your kid's story. And in fact, it shouldn't be. It was yours. So hopefully some people might break free of that. The other thing, I'm really glad you stopped taking off layers when you did, because I thought we were both going to have to take our shirts off. Oh, yeah. It was going to be like, I was going to be like the machine, Burt Kreischer up here if we had to do that. So that was what we did.
Yeah. I just had some spicy Thai food, dude, and like the peppers. Like I told Brad, hey, get me a level 7, and he didn't. I guess the spot's level 7 was like a level 15, so I'm still burning up from it.
I love it. The other thing that I want to bring up before you mentioned we first heard you were living in this mansion, and then you brought up you were living in a small apartment in the Bronx. We're going to talk about how you got there, but one more thing I want to bring up before that. I got a question for you. One of the hardest things I've ever done is work with Navy SEALs. You're the third Navy SEAL I've worked with, because you guys don't take no for an answer for nothing. Like there's always a freaking way. Just tell me a bit about the mindset of like, as you've driven through your career in Hollywood and everything else. I mean, there obviously there is a healthy time to take no for an answer, but like what drives you in your anything's possible to a Navy SEAL. So I can't say no to nothing. Tell me a bit about how that works in your mind.
Yeah, it's automatic. I think even before I got into the SEAL teams, that was the mindset that I had. I think, a lot of people ask the question, are SEALs born or are they made? I think it's different for every single person. I think for some people, like they're born with all the attributes necessary in order to be a SEAL, the mental toughness, and then maybe some are born with it, but then like through life and their circumstances, situation growing up, they're nurtured into that mindset. And then there's some people that just have to, get into SEAL training and like get hammered and then they kind of realize or learn through like every day, not quitting, that, all right, this is, I'm able to acquire this SEAL mindset to persevere and keep moving forward. For me, like I said, I think I was born with it. My dad, and it kind of goes back to my father, he was just a man he could see a way where there was no way. When everybody saw there's absolutely no way at all to achieve a specific goal, he was the guy who said, no, there is a way. Like, no, we can do it. No, we can change this nation. And it's the same thing with my mother. Like my mother always, even when we were little kids, after my father died, she struggled tremendously, but we had food every day. Like, we had clothes, we had a shelter, we never kicked out and put out on the street, even though she struggled tremendously. And so, I feel like my parents' DNA, that persevering DNA, which comes from my father and also my mother, especially my mother, comes from my grandfather, my grandmother, my mother's side. They were beasts. I mean, my grandfather, when he was diagnosed with cancer, they gave him like a month to live, but he was like tall. He was like 6'4", and he was really muscular and fit. And he lived like another 5 years because he just persevering, pushing through is part of who he was. So I think I was born with that mindset. And then when I was growing up in the Bronx, like I had every day to walk that out, right? To walk in perseverance, to thrive, to look at situations and say there's, and see, and everybody around me say there's absolutely no way, but me figure out that way to get to where I needed to be or where I wanted to be, right? And so by the time I got to SEAL training, it was just automatic. It was just there. And that's why, my story, read the book. I went to first phase, got rolled, went through hell, in Hell Week, and almost died. Got enrolled, never quit. Started day one again, went through, and I just kept on going because I knew that I could do it. It was just a part of who I was, and so I take that with me in everything that I do right now. Where it's always. It's a grind, right? And I love the challenge. I love looking at a situation, or I love looking at the ground and saying, okay, there's gold under there. Give me a shovel. Let's start digging. Okay, let's keep on going. Eventually, we're gonna get to it. It's gonna be hard. It's a hot day. It's gonna be so, but let's keep on going. And eventually, like I know that I'll eventually get to the goal. And so that's Hollywood. You have to have that because Hollywood is filled with rejection. I mean, you get rejected it's a business built off of rejection, interestingly. And so if I wasn't born with the mindset that I was born with, and if I didn't hone that and grow within that mindset through my upbringing and through SEAL training, I would have left Hollywood a long time ago because it's just that hard. I mean, you know the deal. And so yeah, I know I gave you a long answer to that question, but I would just say that it was, it's innate.
I love it. Great question. I got another follow-up. I wasn't intending to go there, but so every behavior and trait has a positive one, has a shadow trait to it. So perseverance and stubbornness come together. How do you know when you're crossing that line and like, man, maybe I'm not persevering, I'm just being stubborn?
My wife tells me. She has no problem telling me.
Fair answer.
Yeah, my wife tells, and then I try to keep really good people around me. I mean, Brad, for example, like he's been, working with me for like the last, 4 years. And, and early on, like, when he started working for me, there was obviously hesitation to bring correction. But as I made mistakes, I started going to Brad and saying, yo, dude, if you see me going down a path, if you see me being stubborn or making a decision that I shouldn't make, hey, call me out, like check me. And he does. Because there were times early on when I would send emails and he would be on the email. He'd be like, dude, why did you say that to that person like that? Like, you shouldn't have said that. I was like, I don't care. And then, I finally came around to say, hey, dude, check me on that. So having people like Brad, having people like my wife, and then, having made a lot of mistakes in the past and having, kind of having that sense that check mark, so to speak, where hey, I've been here before. I know what it looks like when I'm being stubborn and I need to stop. I think that experience helps me a lot. I rely on experience a lot and the people around me.
I love it. I love the vulnerability of that too. So a friend of mine who's an Army Ranger who's in the Black Hawk Down crisis, he gave me the best example of leadership I've ever heard. And you said it in your own words earlier, but he said, Nick, leadership is the example you set for the people you serve. Yeah. Like done. And I love the fact that you're setting the example for people who work for you that, hey, you know what? I trust you enough that just the same way I would correct you, you have permission to correct me. I always try to build that into my culture as well, but it's hard to get some people to do it. So it takes a lot of trust. You went from a mansion in Nigeria to a 2-bedroom apartment in the Bronx. Tell us what took you there, and tell us about some of the shenanigans you got up to in the Bronx.
Oh yeah, so my dad, as I mentioned earlier, he was super wealthy. One of his most prized projects was a project known as the Lagoon Development Project, and essentially what that was he dredged the foreshore off of Lagos, and he dredged it, and he essentially turned this swamp into an island. And there's so much more to the story. I won't give it away. It's all in my book. But essentially, then once the land had formed, the Lagos state government came in and said that the federal government was never supposed to sell him that land they didn't sell it to him because it was never there. and again, the Lego state government conveniently waited until land had formed for them to say, oh, this is ours. And so my dad had already invested millions and millions of dollars into this project, not just in purchasing the land, but purchasing the water, but also in dredging the foreshore, hiring engineers, signing contracts so that he could build buildings on there, have stores on there, so on and so forth. And so when the Nigerian Lagos state government came in and took that, because a lot of his assets were wrapped up in the project, we went from rich to poor. But in the midst of that, he died. So like it all happened fast. So within 3 weeks of that happening, like my father passed away. And so when he passed away, there was nobody left to fight the case. There was nobody left to fight the government. My half brother, he was a lawyer just out of law school, young guy. So there was not much he could do. And my mother being American was just like, there's no way I'm raising my kids here in Nigeria. And that's when she brought us to the state and kind of permanently relocated us to Bronx, New York, to the States. And yeah, it was a very interesting transition. I would say because of who my mother was and the way she raised my brother and I, it was somewhat of a seamless transition because she did a really great job of painting our environment as though nothing happened. So that little apartment that we grew up in, she kept a lot of my dad's Nigerian art. She kept it clean. She tried to keep it up so that we had a sense of where we came from and who we were. And she was always, she pressed upon us the importance of taking care of what you have. Like, I remember my mother would, when she would make my brother and I wash the dishes, and one day it would be my turn to wash the dishes and my brother's turn to dry, and then we would flip flop every day. And if the dishes weren't washed perfectly, she would make us do it again. If the dishes weren't dried perfectly, she would take all the dishes out and make us wash and dry them over again, because she was trying to teach us, hey, you take care of your gear. You take care of what you have. Like, I don't care if it's 50 cents. I don't care if it's something that's worth $1 million. You take care of it. And so because she had that mindset, we didn't really, feel the transition as hard. And then on top of that, when my mother delivered the news to my brother and I that our father had passed away, she did it in such a calm way with no tears that me and my brother just looked at each other and said, oh, okay. And plus we were 5 and 4 at the time, so we didn't understand what death meant. And so we just said, okay. And we just went back to playing as we usually did. And so it wasn't until later in life, when I was about 8 years old, that I really began to sense that void, and I really began to understand death and understand where I came from a lot more and understand how that had been lost. That's when I began to kind of search out for a father, and I found that father in the streets. And that's when I started out stealing from my mom, and then stealing from stores, and then stealing from jobs, and then selling drugs, and then running scams. And before I knew it, I was 19. I had built this massive illegal enterprise.
Yeah. Wow. As you got into all of that, you were introduced by a guy who gave you haircuts to rap music. Yeah. And you make a comment in the book, that you love Biggie Smalls. You talked about, he felt like he was talking directly to you, and how hip hop became sort of a surrogate father to you. Yeah. Tell me what that means, and why it was so liberating and deep for you.
Yeah, I think it was because I felt like I was able to identify with the artists. I was able to see myself in them and see my story in their story, right? Because here you had a lot of these pretty much most of the rappers who, they came from the inner city, they came from single parent homes, they grew up in poverty, and I felt like I could relate to them. I felt like when I was listening to their music, they were speaking directly to me and no one else. And so it was because of that I really took hold of hip hop culture, street culture, and I essentially allowed those entities to become my fathers and raise me up and tell me what it meant to be a man, and tell me what it meant to gain respect and to get women into how to make money and how to, get away with making money illegally. And I followed those rappers, my fathers, to a T, and that's kind of how I ended up down the path that I ended up.
Let me ask you that. So how important do you think that's obviously was an influence on your life, like a big influence on your life, and you hooked into it and let it be that for you. In the same way, you've now realized as an adult, you say, you got Marvel movies, superhero movies, they're violent, but you don't take them that way.
Yeah.
So like how dangerous do you think, or I don't want to overly label it because I think there's a place for it, but hip hop music is clearly, most of it is it's pretty negative. How negative of an influence do you think that is on a particularly young Black culture? I think it is. And what do we do about that, or how do we separate that and keep the music and the art alive? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's extremely negative. I mean, I think it's extremely negative. And and one thing I have a problem with is the excuses that, oh, well, we're this is all we have to say. Being an adult now, I just can't tolerate it much. And especially because of the impact that it has. I mean, you have Black men and Black women, objectifying women, calling women the B word, talking about having sex with women and multiple women and all of this stuff. And then you have them talking about carrying out crimes, and this is the way to carry out crimes, and talking about killing each other, shoot this dude if he say this, obviously I'm paraphrasing lyrics, but I'll shoot an S, I'll shoot an N, I'll do this, I'll do that. And it's just like, well, if you want your community to be respected, how can you expect your community to be respected if you're not respecting your community? And so for me, it's, I find it extremely negative. And I find it, it's so easy for young kids who don't have fathers. I know because I still work in inner cities now. I go to inner city schools, I go to prisons, I go to juvenile, and I see these kids and, they're rapping along to these lyrics, or they're emulating these rappers, or they're saying certain phrases that they hear, and they're acting out what they hear because that's all they know, that's their leadership. And it's so hard because I go to these places to try to tell these kids, you're so much more than, especially some of these young girls, you're so much more than just opening your legs and sleeping around. You're so much more than just selling drugs and hustling and fighting. I went to this one school here in San Diego where this is the kid's last shot. If they get in trouble, they're going to jail because they've gotten in trouble so much in the public school system. And they carried out crimes, and judges have sent them to this specific school and told them, if you mess up in this school, you are going to jail. You're going to juvenile center. And it's hard because I go there and I pour out my heart to these kids and I tell them, hey, you're loved, you're special, you're intelligent. There's so much opportunity out there. You can go to college. A lot of these kids, they don't feel like they can go to college or they could ever get into college because they don't hear that message. When all you hear is sell drugs or sleep around or hustle or punch people in the face if they disrespect you, or, there's so many other things we could throw out. If that's all they hear, then that's all they're going to believe they could become. And I know that because I experienced that. I never thought that I would get out of the Bronx. I never in a million years thought that I would get out of the Bronx. And so what I try to tell these kids is you can get out. You can go to college. You can join the military. You can start your own business, legal business. You can be a good father to your child, because some of these kids are 16, 15. They got kids. You can break the cycle, so that's what I try to do. And it's hard at times. It's hard because, again, they've been brainwashed through street culture, music, media, and a lot of other things. And the frustrating thing is that, media doesn't take responsibility for it. They just don't, so I don't get it, but it's life, right?
Yeah, I love what you're doing, but you are in a role where you can change that, and you are using your power for that. And I mad respect for going into these schools and these places to try it, because what I always say, obviously I lived a very different life than you did. We didn't have a lot of money, but I had more love than I could spend. And I feel like the people who have the worst disadvantage are the ones who didn't have good role models growing up. And at least your mom was hard on you, which I know you appreciate now. But at least that helped you get out. Now, in a very different shift to that, you go to a Michael Bay movie called Bad Boys. And honestly, man, I'm always one to admit my ignorance. I said, when you said, it was starring Chris Tucker and Will Smith, and it showed you that black men could be more than hustlers and gangsters. That was shocking to me. Like, I don't, when we have a big conversation right now, I think a helpful conversation and diversity in media, and so many people are like, oh man, why you gotta shove a token black guy in here, or a token, a token, whatever. It's so interesting to me that, as my eyes are open to it, because I'm a white man, like I saw myself on TV a lot. I could be anything I wanted.
Exactly.
I find it really fascinating that until I read it the way you wrote it, I don't think I really realized how, when you didn't have an in-person influence, you found them through media. So finding that first influence was crucial. You tell me about what you discovered that would change your life in in those Michael Bay movies, in The Rock.
Yeah. I think you kind of touched on it directly. That was, again, media is powerful. It's a powerful tool. And again, for kids who don't have both parents or a father in their life, it's where they go to find those parents. And that's one of the reasons why I love working in media now and telling stories. Is because I want to be able to, for those kids who don't have that role model in their life, I want the characters that I'm creating and the stories that I'm telling to be that positive role model, right? So that kids could see themselves, especially young African-American kids, and say, wow, look at the CIA agent in this movie, or look at this, this war hero in this movie, or look at this engineer in this movie. Like, I could do that, I want to do that, and So yeah, that's what Bad Boys did for me. When I saw Bad Boys with Martin Lawrence, by the way, you say Chris Tucker, but Martin Lawrence.
Oh, sorry.
And Will Smith. That was like that was the first movie where I really saw, I connected, again, just like the rappers, I connected with those characters because they were cool. They were down to earth. They were kind of like me, so to speak. And then for them to be heroes, that's when I was just like, wow, like, I could be a hero too. Like, I could be cool too. Like, I could go help people. I could be something other than just an athlete, which there's nothing wrong with being an athlete, but I could be something other than just an athlete or a drug dealer or a rapper. Like, there's other opportunities out there for me. And then, a year later, The Rock came out, and, there were Navy SEALs in that film. And that was the first time I was exposed to Navy SEALs. And there was one black SEAL in that movie who was he was a real SEAL, because Michael Bay uses real SEALs. And that's why I was just like, wow, like, I could do that. That's what I want to do. If I ever turn my life around, that's what I would do. I would be a SEAL. And so again, that came from media, educating me, teaching me, exposing me to this world that I had never been exposed to. And then ultimately that's what led to my decision to become a Navy SEAL. But it would have never happened if I didn't see myself on screen through Martin Lawrence and Will Smith, through the Navy SEALs and that black SEAL. Like, if I didn't see myself, I want to have become that. And I think that's one of the biggest issues I have with Hollywood, because again, Hollywood preaches diversity, preaches inclusion, but you don't see a lot of big budget African-American led films. You just don't. You'll see one, Black Panther, but you don't see those high caliber, high concept, expensive movies starring African Americans. You see them starring, white characters all the time. And again, a lot of these kids see themselves in their characters, white kids, and they're like, oh, wow, they see it all the time, like you were saying, and oh, I could do that, right? But we need to see more high concept, expensive, high budget, kind of like Black Panther type budgets, $100 million budgets films, where we're really able to put forth an action hero or action star continuously, consistently, that young kids could look at, maybe alongside watching a rap video or listen to rap music, but also look at it and say, wow, I could do that. I could do that.
I dig that. All right. So you got into all sorts of mess, which people need to read the book, Transformed. Go buy the book, check it out. It's an amazing read. I listened on Audible. It was fun to hear you read it. It was great. I listened to books at 2 speeds, so you're talking real slow right now, but it was great. Now, we won't get into everything, but sort of one of your final big hustles was a big cell phone sort of thing you'd figured out, and you got really worried you were going to get caught, and that you quit that, and you decided to join the Navy. They'll see you even had problems because of some outstanding things on your record and all that. But I'll let them read all that in the book. But let's go to the moment you decided that you were going to try to become a SEAL, and then you show up for SEAL training. Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah. So it was a process. It wasn't just me showing up. Like, I had to go through a screening process to screen and get in, and that was hard in and of itself, just because I had just learned how to swim, and you pass the screening test, and then to get in. So anyway, I did that. I got the first day of SEAL training was extremely rough because they throw absolutely everything at you. It was January. So, it was freezing cold. It was a cold time of the year. The water was really cold. On our first day, we had a swim called Wetsuit Appreciation Swim, where you're swimming in the bay with no wetsuit. And it was a struggle for me because, when I was training to go to SEAL training, I trained without fins because I thought that, I just need to pass the screening test, which is a 500-yard swim without fins. And then once I passed that screening test, like everything else is going to be cakewalk. Or I didn't know much about the fin swimming, and I had never swam with fins before. So during that first day, when they threw me in the water with those fins on, it was a nightmare. It was an absolute nightmare. All the instructors were just like, how do you show up to SEAL training and you can't swim? Like, what is going on here? And they all started putting their money on me not lasting a day. But not only did I last a day, but I stuck around for a long time.
Yep. We'll dig into a couple pieces of that. But one of the things that I thought was really unique about the book, I've seen and heard several, like SEAL training experiences recounted. But I'm sitting there, I'm listening to it, and I'm puckering when you're talking about like the logs, the water sitting in, and like, I'm like, and so while I'm having my nice suburban run, I'm thinking about, man, that would be so tough. But at least, it's the government. Like, they're not going to let, no one's going to die. And like the next paragraph, you're like, and a guy died. I'm like, I'm out. Like, I'm completely out. And it first seemed like Disney World, they're going to break you mentally, but they're going to take care of you physically. But people actually die in this training, huh?
Yeah, people have died in the training. As you pointed out, a guy died in my class, Rob Vetter, and I was right there. I was one of the medics that tried to, bring him back. He was later transported to the hospital, and he was on life support for a few weeks, but then they eventually pulled the cord. But yeah, it's no joke. It's a tough program. And if you have any cracks in your armor, or if you have any medical conditions that you hid to get into the program, it's going to expose that program's going to expose it. And not saying that that's what happened with him, but it's not the safest program.
I got it. You had well, let me say this. It seems to me, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, that if you aren't willing to die, you're not going to make it through SEAL training anyway. That's what they're looking for.
Absolutely. Right? Yeah. You have to be. You got to be. Yeah. That's what they're looking for. They're looking for the guys who are willing to die and then get up, keep going, die again, and then get up, keep going, and die again. That's what they're looking for. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, and it makes sense. If I'm going to send you on a special mission, if you're not willing to die for the cause, which first cause is you want to be a SEAL, show me your commitment. And so, again, there's amazing stories in Transformed about how much you struggled, almost died, ICU. I want people to read the book.
Passed out in the water.
All of it. So I don't want to give it all away, but I want to go into a couple different things here. You broke your foot, your ankle, and had to do 2 more jumps. Like there's a ton in here. You are a bad man, Remi. But one of the things I want to talk about is so you have this incredible story. But to me, I've learned so much about storytelling from masters like you that the way a story is told in many ways is what makes it a great story or a crap story, right? I was talking to a friend of mine who has a best-selling book out. Book did phenomenal.
Yeah.
And I said, hey, man, just tell me, how did you – there's been other people in your position, very much like you, by the way.
Yeah.
I asked him the same question. I said, how did you – I know this wasn't an accident. How did you orchestrate the success of this book? He said, well, Nick, first of all, you know what makes a good book? I said, well, I think so, but you're obviously trying to make a point. So you tell me.
Yeah.
He said, a really great writer.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, okay. He said, and you know what I'm not? I'm not a really great writer. So what I did is I went out and found a really great writer to tell my good story. Yeah. And it became an epic story and an epic book, sold a ton. Yeah. You are a great writer, but let's walk through a little bit about when you first decided you were going to tell your own story. The first thing everyone says, I mean, Navy SEAL thing's sort of cool. Your friends in Nigeria thing's sort of cool, whatever. But like everybody's got a story to tell. And especially in the industry, like book agents, like, oh, great, another memoir. Yeah. Tell me a little bit about how you approached that, why you even thought someone would be interested in a major publisher buying your story when you're one of even, I don't know, thousands of Navy SEALs. Yeah. Like, tell me what gave you the confidence and how you went through some of that process.
Well, interestingly, I didn't want to write a book. I didn't pursue writing a book. I ran from it. For many years, I had a lot, even when I was in buds, like, outside of the book thing, there were guys who would hear my story and they would just be like, dude, your story is crazy. And they would tell somebody, you need to hear Remi's story. You need to hear Remi's story. And then after I got out of the military, I started hearing that a lot more, especially as I traveled and would speak at different places and share my story or speak on different topics. And what happened was I did Transformers. And when I was part of the press junket for the Transformers release, and I went on a Today Show, and you can find the clip on the Today Show now with me, Hoda, and Kathy Lee Gifford. And while I'm on the air, I'm thinking I'm going to just talk about the movie that I was in, but they, Kathy, kind of like you, Kathy and Hoda, say, share your story. You need to share your story with our audience. It's a crazy story. So I start sharing my story, and at the end of it, Kathy Lee says, your story's amazing. Like, you need to write a book. And your book needs to be made into a movie. That was her exact words. And you can see this right on live on the air if you go on YouTube and you can find that clip. And I was like, okay, whatever. I kind of smiled it off because I heard it before and I knew I'd never wanted to write a book. And then when we got backstage, Kathy Lee reiterated. She was just like, listen, Remi, you have an amazing story. Like, why don't you want to tell your story? And I said, yeah, it's really a bad thing for me coming from my community and SEAL teams to write a book. And I just don't want to be put in a bad category with guys who've written a book, because that's not me. I've been able to build a really good reputation in my community. And she said, yeah, Remi, I hear that, but you have a really, really unique story. And she said, I know that you could focus on telling your story in a way that doesn't glorify the SEAL teams, or that doesn't glorify what you did in the SEAL teams. It just focuses on your story, and that can help people who have come from your background, or maybe even people who didn't come from your background. I know that in your heart, you would write it that way, opposed to the wrong way that would hurt your ties to the community. And I thought about it, and I said, oh yeah, sure, maybe. And she said, well, let me introduce you to the VP of one of the VPs at HarperCollins. And she says, can I do that? I said, sure. She said, I'm gonna tell him if he doesn't sign you to a book deal, then I'm gonna just take you somewhere else and get you signed to another book deal. And that's how it happened. Like, I hit her back and I said, all right, I listened to what you said. I meditated on you. You have my permission to connect me to your publisher. And she did, and I had a book deal within 2 weeks. So that's how it happened. And it wasn't me, I want a book deal, I want to tell my story. It was like people kept telling me to tell my story, and then Kathy Lee Gifford essentially forced me to get a book deal and tell my story. So that's how it all came about.
I love it. So you dropped a little thing in there, which I think is the secret of this. So you were on in Transformers. So if you just can get in Transformers, you can get a book deal. No. So how did you end up in Transformers? That's another great story.
Yeah, I was in grad school at the time, just finishing up my master's, writing papers, and there's a lot more to the story. I won't give it all away, but long story short, a woman who worked with Bay reached out to me and said, hey, Bay's looking for somebody with your background to work on the film. Can you start tomorrow? And I was just like, yeah, I'm writing papers. I don't have a day job right now, so sure, why not? And that's kind of how I showed up for one day. That one day turned into 3 weeks. 3 weeks turned into 6 months, and I was made cast, and that's how it all happened. But again, just like the book thing, it wasn't something I was I was chasing. It wasn't something that I wanted. I was actually in grad school because I started a consulting firm, and I really wanted to focus on, bringing a lot of principles such as mental toughness, critical thinking, teamwork, communication, bringing a lot of those lessons that I learned in the community, and then also from school, from my education, and into business. So that's what I was in school for, not to be an actor or anything, or in Hollywood in general, and it just happened.
And you're in another Michael Bay film or TV show or something now, right?
Yeah, I just finished working on Ambulance, which is action thriller. Michael Bay directed it. Jake Gyllenhaal's the lead, and Yahya Abdul and Isa Gonzalez. So it's gonna be an awesome film.
That's incredible. Well, so I have more questions about how to tell your story, because I think there's a bunch of informative things you could tell us there. But one thing, as you talk about in the movie, or sorry, in the book, and is coming to Christ in the movie. So I know you have great faith. One of the things that it seems to me like you have done is you've walked through the doors that were opened. So, if the door's open, all right, well, I'll check it out. I'll have faith that maybe this is what I'm supposed to do. Let me check it out.
Yeah.
How do you think you operate differently now that you have that faith than you operated before? And any insights on that?
Yeah, I would just say, I just rely on the Lord to guide my steps 100%, and I'm content when the door. I've learned to be content when the door is closed, because I've had so many situations that have happened to me in the past where, I've wanted something to happen so bad and it didn't happen, and it turned out to be a blessing. Case in point, when I got out of the military, like I wanted so much to be a public speaker. I wanted so much for my consulting business to take off. Like that's what I wanted, and I worked really hard for that. But the door kept on closing, but another door opened, and instead of just holding on to that, I had to trust, hey, this is God's plan for me. And again, the biggest thing that I take with me is God has a plan for me. And I know it sounds cliche and people hear that all the time, but God does have a plan. And if something bad happens, you know what? If it wasn't part of God's plan, he'll work through that plan. Everything works together for the good of those who love God and called according to his purposes for them. And so that's just how I try to live. And that's what keeps my mind intact. Right? Because at the end of the day, the mind is the battlefield. And I think a lot of people, they lose battles not outwardly, they lose battles inwardly. And so the way I win my battles inwardly, in which affects my outward and affects how I have my relationship with my wife and my kids and my coworkers and all of these people I work with, is by trusting that God has a plan and moving forward in his plan. And if a door closes that I really wanted to be open, being content in the fact that he's protecting me from something that he doesn't want me to do.
That's incredibly insightful. I think also, in all that, so everyone knows, like Remi always goes to the extreme. So he went from finding faith, and then he was like a chaplain and like overseas. He's leading worship and all sorts of writing sermons. So I love that. Now, one of the things I asked a very famous person recently, said, "Hey, would you let me tell your story? You have an incredible story." And his response was like, "I always thought they would do that after I was gone." So, a lot of people, when I tell a lot of stories that are in motion, how did you decide that, my story's not over? I mean, I would imagine you would think the best of your story is yet to come.
Yeah.
What made you decide that, okay, I have enough of a body of work to tell it now? Any insight on that?
As far as the book?
Yeah. I mean, so you you told what had happened up to that point. And so what gave you the confidence I know they were offering you a book deal, but still mentally you had to decide, I got to be able to do this. Yeah. How did you approach your story when it's not done yet?
Well, I knew where I could cap it off. I knew that I wanted the last chapter to have something to do with Nigeria. I didn't know what that would look like. And then until finally I got towards the last, I ended up just flying to Nigeria. Literally, like when I was like, I don't know how this book is going to end, but I just know that for some reason it needs to end with Nigeria. So I flew to Nigeria, and I was out there for, I want to say like two weeks or so. And I went to the island that my dad developed. I went to the old school the private school that I went to. And then obviously, how I ended the book, but I won't give it away for the audience. But I expected to end the book on my dad's island. but an event happened that was way more powerful to me, and that's how I knew it needed to end. Like, that was going to be my third act finale. So I don't know if
No, it answers it great. Here's the thing: you had an insight. You were given a gut feeling and an inkling. Perhaps God delivered you a dream. I go to events and places all the time where people ask me like, "Why are you going there?" I'm like, "I just feel like I'm supposed to go. Like I got invited. It seemed like, and I know that I'm gonna meet someone or get some idea or something's gonna happen. I'm going on faith, and that's a fun way to live, by the way. I believe." If you plan your life so much that you don't give God elbow room, none of the cool stuff happens. 100%. So I dig that you do that in faith. Now, you have so many stories in your life. Like if someone is trying to write a book, how do you choose? Like there's so many stories. Like how do you choose what stories to tell?
You got to find that through line. I think the most important thing is that through line. What events connect? First act, second act A, second act B. For third act A, third act B, and in our lives, in every single person's life, like you can structure a story through those connecting points. We all have that one thing, and I think the big thing that connected me, that connected my story, was actually I was having a conversation with somebody about this in the beginning. Was my dedication, in the dedication of my book, I dedicate the book to my kids and my nephews and my nieces and my great grandkids and all future generations. So I knew that my through line was going to be, it's going to be something along the lines of not having a father, but trying to find my father through life, or trying to fill that void and finally having filled that void and then becoming a father. I knew it was going to be something along those lines, and so having that through line it kept me from jumping all over the place, right? I was still able to tell all of these other stories, but I had that core story that connected that overall story, so they didn't read like a mess.
I love it. Now, one of the lessons here, again, we have many a biblical reference, which I think is a pretty good book, by the way. You can't serve two masters. So what you really just said is you determined, what do I want the outcome to be? What is the master I'm going to serve with this book? And let me see what fits to that through line, as you called it. You start getting to acts and stuff. I don't want people's eyes to glaze over. It's like you're a professional storyteller. You got this down. The other thing, by the way, is get help. If you're watching this and you don't know how to tell your story, like again, I hate writing. I'm actually not bad at it, but I hate it. And so I get people who are really good to help me, because I know the difference between a mediocre book and a great book is a great writer and a great storyteller.
Another thing I did too, which was interesting, which helped me a lot in the writing process, was two things. Everything, again, like I said, everything works together for the good of those who love God, called according to his purpose for them. I enrolled at the Lee Strasberg Film and TV Institute in July, like first week of July of 2017. I signed my book deal in August of 2017, so like a month later. And then I was at the Lee Strasberg Institute until the end of December of 2017. Throughout the majority of that, I finished writing my book in March of 2018. But I say all that to say, while I was in the Lee Strasberg Theater and Film Institute, I learned so much about storytelling. I learned so much about dialogue because I was having to act, and I went to improv school. I went to there was an improv class I was taking at the school. There was, and just so you know, Al Pacino trained there, Robert De Niro trained there, a lot of Angelina Jolie trained there. So a lot of Oscar winners have gone through the Lee Strasberg Institute or some form of this training. And so there was so many scene study, there was so many classes that I took there, unbeknownst to me, was helping me as a writer. Like it was, because I would read these scripts and I would have to interpret these scripts and try to say, okay, what was the writer wanting these actors or these characters to portray? What were they trying to project to the audience? And so I was able to kind of reverse engineer it within my writing. So that helped me tremendously, and again, I signed my book deal a month after enrolling in the school. So throughout the majority of my time in that school, I'm learning writing. I'm learning, I'm going to class, I'm coming back home writing, and I'm taking all of these little nuggets. And then another thing that I did was I would go on YouTube and I would listen to writing classes, like lessons from the screenplay, story arc, story structure,
Well, you're a student of the game. You're immersing yourself in it. I think that's incredible. And one of the things I always tell people, they're like, people want to send me movie scripts all the time. I'm sure you get even more. And what I say to them is, hey, is this your first one? And I like, what number is this? Because like, hey, even if you have an amazing idea, let's just be honest, the chances of your first one ever being on par with commercial level, they don't exist basically. So why don't we just have someone, why don't we find someone to help you? And you shouldn't be ashamed to get that help. And we all had, you had teachers, professors, all that stuff coming up. So I love that. A couple things. Make sure you buy Remi's book, Transformed. It's absolutely incredible. Follow Remi on social. I can't wait to see what the next act is. If anyone wants to know what me and Remi are both working on, today wasn't about that. You can Google both of our names. Remi, how else can we support you, my friend?
Yeah, man, just this is it. Enjoy. Get the book. I hope you enjoy the book. As you said, you guys can follow me on social media, and so you could track with other projects that I have got going. But yeah, if you want to get the full story, check out the book. You can get it anywhere where books are sold: Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, BAM, anywhere where books are sold.
Got it. I got one piece of advice for you, and then one thank you. Make everyone read your book before they work with you. Number two. Thank you for everything you do, man. Honored to call you a friend. I appreciate working with you. Same,
brother. On the same thing. Thank you. It's a blessing working with you. Yeah.
Likewise. Thanks, man. All right. Thanks for joining us, Remi. And we'll see you guys next time on Now to Next. If you enjoyed the show, make sure you like, comment, all the fun stuff, and share it. And we'll see you next time. Take care. Hey, Nick Nanton here, and thanks for tuning in to Now to Next. I want to make sure you don't miss a single episode of this show on YouTube. So before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You'll have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, just go into your settings and switch on notifications. Thanks for watching.